Oh, hi there, Adam.
Hi, Dave. How's it going?
It's going okay. I'm really excited about talking to Casey and Anthony Case and all the details for 2 hours. We're not actually going to do that. I think we've agreed not to do that.
Yeah, we've agreed not to talk about Casey Anthony today.
No. What is more important than Casey? Well, what's really important is we should introduce ourselves. I am Dave Weigel. I'm a political reporter for Slate.
And I'm Adam Serwer. I'm a staff writer with the American Prospect.
And I'm calling from the Capitol today, where I don't expect anything to get done because that's not usually how things work. But the main thing being discussed at all times is the debt ceiling compromise, or lack of a compromise, or potential compromise. And you have been boning up on the constitutional option, which seems to be something that only ever works for Republicans, or the threat of which only works for Republicans, not for Democrats. But so I am spending all my time trying to find out what could be cut and what has to be cut in order to raise the debt ceiling. And you have found one of many people who have found and written about this solution that gets around it. What is it?
Yeah, so I should probably say that this is a very conflict-diverse administration, and I think Obama himself would read from the Necronomicon on the Senate floor and sacrifice 1,000 innocent children to the Babylonian god Ixtoltu before he would confront Republicans on this and take the sort of constitutional option, so to speak. But so this thing that has emerged, I think the most prominent person who's making this argument is a Yale law professor named Jack Balkin, who's sort of an interesting guy because unlike a lot of liberals who sort of do the sort of Constitution should be interpreted in light of the times thing, he's a proponent of this kind of liberal originalism where he goes back and he looks at the political debates at the time and he sort of argues that the framers were taking the position that liberals are taking on some contemporaneous legal or political debate. And what he's found is, in the context of the 14th Amendment, there's a provision in it that sort of suggests that default might be unconstitutional. And when you go back and, what he did was he went back and he looked at the arguments over the 14th Amendment, and it seemed pretty clear to the legislators at the time that they were trying to put the issue of default beyond sort of partisan gamesmanship, that the idea was they really didn't want the country's sort of full faith and credit being at risk because the political parties couldn't get along, which is sort of interesting, and it may be right on the sort of the legalese, but politically it seems like a complete non-starter.
Well, the founders set this system up, and that's where conservatives certainly go for everything. The amendments are part of the story, but you hear much more discussion about repealing various amendments made in the progressive era. I mean, this was a Reconstruction era thing. Made in the progressive era, they do about this. So, I mean, what the founders put in place is what Republicans keep citing back to me when I ask them about this. I mean, they're almost like put out when you ask about this. And they think it's pretty clear that the way this was designed, Congress has the power here. But 14th Amendment, I mean, it's an interesting reading. I think what got me interested was that Tim Geithner brought it up kind of unbidden when Mike Allen was interviewing him, and when the White House has been asked about it, they haven't knocked it off. I mean, Chuck Schumer didn't dismiss it, but they're not running with it, and I don't think they can, because this is not how you do this. I mean, this reminds me. I'm mixing up constitutional authority with rules Congress makes up. But it reminds me of when it became somewhat more difficult to pass the health care bill, and Democrats pointed out that often what Congress does is deem that something's been passed, it's already been passed in the House, and they knew it keep it moving. And immediately, it became this huge rallying cry for the Tea Party and Republicans that this was un-American. I mean, actually, the first step they took was that state attorneys general wrote letters saying they would sue in their states. Ken Cuccinelli did this first, if they even tried this. And I think that's the first thing that would happen if this got serious. You'd have, probably Cuccinelli again, he's pretty good at this kind of thing, writing a letter and saying, look, if you just start spending this money without raising the debt limit in Congress, I'm just going to sue. And that would defeat the whole purpose, because, I mean, if you have uncertainty about whether the government will lose a lawsuit and all this debt it's been paying is unconstitutional, then this whole thing about not terrifying the markets into fleeing into some other sovereign market. There's sovereign fund is moot, and that's the problem here. I mean, it's not just that Republicans. I think they do have the better argument here, because this is something Congress has always done. It's just something that.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
I think it is a power that should be reserved to Congress. It just shouldn't. It shouldn't. The bigger problem is not that Congress can do this. The bigger problem is that it's not clear that members of Congress understand how this stuff works.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a question of whether Congress would be able to establish standing in order to sue for the debt limit. But I think you're right. A long, drawn-out court battle over the debt limit probably would defeat the purpose of sort of trying to save or trying to prevent the economy from getting worse. I should say, since the recovery is hardly robust. But I also think what I thought of actually was the debate over the filibuster of Republican judges. And I think Republicans spent a long time laying the groundwork for the argument that the filibuster of judges was unconstitutional. Now that they've turned around and filibustered, or managed to prevent the appointment of Obama's judges, and they've had incredible success doing it.
Right.
But I think they're just like, if liberals had been arguing that the debt limit was unconstitutional like 2 or 3 years ago or something, I think it might be different. But right now it reads a little bit like Calvinball, in terms of like you're just making up the rules as you're going on.
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, well, we don't want to play this game, so we're just going to say it's unconstitutional and do what we want. So even though I think Balkan's probably actually right on the sort of constitutional merits, I think it's politically, I think it's just impossible as an option. And I think the administration, maybe a different administration might be willing to take the risk, but the Obama administration has been very risk averse. They don't want to fight battles they think they have a good chance of losing, and so they don't do it. And they'd rather, I think, from a political perspective, I think the White House thinks that by staying sort of above the fray in these arguments, and by somehow brokering a deal, they put themselves on better political footing for 2012 than by turning the president into sort of a partisan warrior. And I think that's that's part of why they've come across as so risk averse, and why a lot of liberals have been frustrated at what they feel like is the White House's fear of conflict.
Yeah, this is one of the areas where it's really stark, and you've seen liberal commentators hitting them especially hard on this, because back in December, when this first came up as a possible issue, it was pretty well telegraphed. June the Mint was saying we wouldn't vote on it. It was one of these things. This is how this always happens, is that it doesn't seem to happen this way on the left. Bernie Sanders doesn't seem to be able to drive policy into his house. But Rand Paul and the Mint, a few other senators got asked what the debt limit is, this like crazy gotcha, and they said, yeah, we're not going to vote for it unless it comes with these bells and whistles that we want. And the president was asked this by Mark Amander in I guess it was November or December. It was the press conference after the tax deal got figured out, and he asked why not include a debt limit increase as part of the deal, and the president just said, yeah, well, no one's going to play chicken with this. Well, yeah, they are. I mean, it's not just that they're risk averse, but they can't see risks. They can't see risk coming. They can't see problems coming. Even after 2 years, when the measure of the Republicans are dealing with, it should have been pretty obvious. I mean, that's where this comes from. Like, that's why I don't take it seriously. Even if they have a good constitutional argument, even if Alexander Hamilton would have wanted the government to just tell people to buzz off about this, which he probably would have. He would have preferred a monarch do it, but then it doesn't matter, because they're really bad at anticipating the way it's going to go. And is that like that's just like the political argument? Is it unfair? No, I think it is good for Congress to play a role here. I mean, like, the bigger problem is if you look at what a lot of members of Congress are saying about what the risks are. The bigger problem is they just don't really understand what the risks are. They don't trust experts who say the risks are this and that. And then that's the real distinction among Republicans, is that Democrats too. Republicans just do not, like, if you talk about the deadlines, that Jeff Sessions, who is the ranking member of Budget, will say, yeah, we've seen a lot of deadlines. Like, we don't really buy this. We think we can keep this moving along. And so that's the bigger problem, is like like Tim Geithner keeps trying to explain this by sending a letter every once in a while. That's not really cutting it. Like, they don't trust him, and that's not a lot of a counter argument.
Yeah. I don't know what to say. I mean, like, I don't know how much of how much of this is like them not understanding that it's important, or if it's just good negotiating. I mean, my dad always says if you're gonna walk into a car dealership and try to buy a car, you have to be willing to walk out. And from the beginning, Republicans have sort of been willing to walk out, and Democrats have made it clear that they're not, and that they have no, they have no intention of not cutting a deal. And I think to the extent that the sort of quote-unquote constitutional option might have been useful, it might have been useful as their threat to walk out, but it wasn't even deployed in that way. So it's sort of useless even as a bluff.
Yeah, we could go into this forever. I mean, we should go to some other topics because, like, you could spend a lot of time just discussing the way that Democrats want to keep playing by the rules that Republicans keep writing for them. I mean, the filibuster is a good example where it didn't used to be quite this hardened. Democrats made it a bit worse, but it made it a lot worse. Democrats have a chance to change it. They don't because they're afraid of losing power. Same thing, this keeps happening. It's not really surprising anymore. It's just kind of fun to see on what various issues they can be totally snowed on. But I mean, I guess the point of all this is that people. This is an issue that's going to be politically difficult. It's related to whether the economy can recover to the degree that Barack Obama wins again. I think we should talk about the Republican primary field because I do notice maybe less than a month ago, but still some confidence among Democrats that because the field is so bad on their side that they can win. And I'm noticing that Obama can just beat somebody. And I'm noticing an immense amount of attention on Michele Bachmann, like a new thing about her every day, which seems weird because I remember 2 months ago, everyone just agreeing that she had no chance. Now that she's the official anti-Romney of the moment who can win Iowa, like her whole past is getting dug out. So everyone today is talking about this Jason Horowitz profile of Michele and Marcus Bachmann, her husband, which goes over a lot of familiar territory. It has new interviews in there, but it has a lot of stuff in there about her, what she did as a politician before she was a Tea Party conservative, because you couldn't really be one before February 2009, which was, a lot of work on marriage, a lot of work on school choice too. But she was obsessed with with gay rights, obsessed with gay marriage. She was very open about it, and at this point, she isn't really taking much of a stand on the New York gay marriage law. And I think that's kind of one of the hooks of the piece. No, she's not jumping. She's not jumping on it, which is a huge change from 7 years ago when the President of the United States thought it would be a great issue and was right to say that we needed to protect marriage. But I mean, so did you've been reading the same stuff about Bachmann, I guess, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because I think in a lot of ways she reminds me of Huckabee. But without the baggage. Like Huckabee had I think I saw one conservative accuse Huckabee of deep down being a Rawlsian liberal, which I thought was really funny. But she's sort of like Huckabee without the sort of. But the Club for Growth doesn't hate her. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny that's what we discuss as the baggage. Is not that she once warned that legal gay marriage would lead to polygamy, but that she, unlike Huckabee, has never supported tax increases.
Right.
That means she has no baggage.
Right. It means she has no baggage. But I mean, I think the truth is that she does. This is becoming baggage in a way that it wouldn't have been baggage for a Republican nominee in 2004 or even 2008. Which is that New York is actually New York's a blue state, but in terms of approval for gay marriage, it's actually comparable to the rest of the country. In terms of the levels of approval for it, it's something
if you look at who votes Democrat, it includes a lot of white Catholics and a lot of blacks and things
and
like
a lot
that.
of Hispanics who are religiously observant and maybe politically liberal, but socially conservative in certain ways. And I think what's interesting is that her sort of her unwillingness to sort of jump on this I think suggests that the anti-gay stuff is baggage in a way that, for a Republican nominee, that in a way that it wasn't, a long time ago. I mean, the truth is that even, there are a lot of people who, in New York, I think, who are young, who are going to grow up and become conservative Republicans who just don't get the gay thing. And I think, we're starting to get to a point in American history where those people are becoming adults, and they're voting and they're thinking about who to vote for. And someone like Michele Bachmann and her husband, whose job it is, to convince gay people that there's something wrong with them, and that they need therapy to make themselves straight, is really going to be unappealing, even if, they believe that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me weep for Mitch Daniels, because Daniels made this very accurate point a couple of times in 2010 that the big issue of the future was the economy, the near future was the economy and the debt, and that there'd be basically a social truce as far as he was concerned on social issues. And, there's as much influence they've lost in some ways, there are still lots of social conservative groups who have lots of events and lots of contacts to reporters, and they did a pretty good, effective campaign of making that line just intolerable. Like, no Republican could agree to that. And Bachmann herself, I remember seeing her at the Focus on the Family, Family Research Council conference last year, and being one of many Republicans who ran for president knocking the social truce thing. And yet, here comes this huge fat target in it's in New York. Not just that, but in New Hampshire, the Republicans have a veto-proof majority. They might lose the next election, the veto-proof thing. But a veto-proof majority, and they're trying to undo the gay marriage law there. It's not much of an issue there. I mean, you're effectively agreeing that there's a truce if this is so prominent and half the country is celebrating it, and you're not saying anything about it. I mean, you're going on a bus tour, and when asked if homosexuality is a choice, not answering. I mean, one thing, it's a trap for you, but if you don't believe that there's a truce going on, you engage in that. I mean, she won't answer whether or not homosexuality is a choice, but she will state her opinion of whether, like, Obama runs a gangster government or anything else on economics, right? And that shift is pretty. The shift is pretty incredible. It's pretty heartening if you're a gay rights supporter. It's pretty heartening to watch the National Organization for Marriage flounder like this. But it is amazing, because this was how Bachmann rose to prominence in Minnesota.
Yeah.
This was why there was an anti-Bachmann blog in 2005, and liberal sites were already starting to make fun of her because of that stuff. And the whole, like, the place gay politics has right now is it's interesting to me. It's being explored pretty well, but it's I don't know quite where it's going for both parties, because gay voters broke a little bit more Republican in 2010 they did in 2008, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, Ben Smith has written, I think correctly, that as Obama loses some support from groups that gave him lots of money in 2008, he's counting more on gay donors based on his record of repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I know the problems with that, and of not standing in the way of gay marriage laws, things like that. And in addition to that, since he signed this bill, Andrew Cuomo has been talked about just completely straight-faced. No one really contradicts this as as a national politician after signing the gay marriage law. There's a couple of other points I would make before I let you talk again, because I want to hear you. I don't know why I keep downloading this stuff. I just want to see what you think. But I mean, I was been talking to a bunch of Democrats. One particularly in Colorado, I was talking to, and I was at this Aspen Night Festival last week. Was really bullish on Cuomo as a national candidate because of that, and because he thought that the Democratic Party's future was going to be post-union, so that they would need a coalition of progressive interests that were not obsessed with collective bargaining and preserving unions when deunionization just looked like this unstoppable trend. And the other thing is, I had notices. Someone pointed out a couple days ago that when the way that the DOMA decision by the White House to not enforce it, the way that was played by Republicans, was not even as a culture war thing. They went immediately to saying this was a political decision that was like probably impeachable. I mean, there was some culture war stuff in there, but the assumption they started with was that this was the White House trying to score something politically, which would have been like insane 7 years ago. No Democrat did that 7 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, I don't think there's so much a truce as much as a sort of tactical retreat for the moment. I think generally people are starting to recognize that this fight is a losing one, and that, National Organization for Marriage, mostly what they're doing is forestalling the inevitable in terms of when they even get success. And I'd say, the New York thing was a huge deal because New York is one of the, New York is the biggest state yet to legalize gay marriage, but when D.C. legalized gay marriage, that was low-hanging fruit for Republicans because they took over Congress and they can tell the district to do whatever they want, and they haven't touched it.
No, I mean, I remember
they have not messed with it, and I think even though New York was sort of a huge deal, and it was the reaction from Republicans was really noticeable because there's so many people running for president who you could ask, what do you think about this? I mean, the fact that D.C.'s marriage equality law has gone untouched is actually kind of remarkable.
Yeah, and after a point, you start to assume that that's intentional because it's just not a political winner anymore.
Right.
I mean, they'll go after abortion in a couple of targeted ways, but there's really, there's really not as easy. It's not as easy to frame this with gay marriage. Most people just don't think it's that big a problem.
Right.
I mean, this is what Daniels was right about. That just things are bad and people don't care about this. I mean, there's a lot of extremism rearing its head in other ways because of economic angst, but this is a group of people that no one blames when the economy is bad.
Right. No one thinks thinks that gay guy stole my job.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I'm gonna. There's so many. I was about to make a joke. There's not any really non-obvious jokes to make there, so I'll move on. It's also, if you read the Nam is waving this flag, and it is claiming that it has a plan to unravel this. But if you read, I love to read what they say about this and through their interviews. Because they, in their universe, it really is it's a small group of very wealthy gay people who keep doing this behind people's backs, and if they expose them, they're going to win. I mean, this is their kind of odious legal strategy in California, which was a response, angry gay activists were exposing who donated to help Prop 8, right? The response makes sense, but it doesn't really seem like it's connected to money at all. It's just there are lots of problems, and here's a problem that doesn't seem to be affecting anyone's life, so they move on. I mean, I think the progress might be less quick if this was not a horrible economic time. I mean, culture war is more successful when there's nothing else to worry about. That's always not all of it. I mean, again, immigration is tied to economic angst, but culture war stuff, nah. I mean, sound silly.
Nam tried this in D.C. where, D.C. has a very large black population, and the perception was this would be an easy win if they could make it to a referendum. And because of, Marion Barry, who opposed D.C.'s gay rights law in the 70s, pushed a human rights law that prevented, certain basic rights from being put to a vote. So basically, 1979, Marion Barry outsmarted 2008 Marion Barry, or 2009 Marion Barry. But, after that, Nam put a lot of money into D.C. trying to run opposition candidates against certain members of the city council they thought would be weak in order to sort of punish them for voting for marriage equality, and it just totally flopped. And one of the guys actually got an endorsement from the Washington Post because the councilman he was running against, Terry Thomas, is sort of seen as corrupt. But he lost handily, and Nam wasted all this money thinking that they were walking into a place that was really sympathetic to their worldview, and just not understanding that a lot of people might be opposed to gay marriage, but it's just not that important to them as an issue. It's not something they're going to vote on.
Yeah, the connectivity is difficult. I mean, it was again, I get more fun from reading their statements about this than anyone else, because they will point because they'll point to things like, look at all the people that we defeated in New Hampshire. I'm like, oh yeah, you defeated them. That's definitely the reason that the Democrats lost a lot of ground in New Hampshire, was because people were angry about gay marriage. Like the clearest victory they have, they can win state referenda and whatnot, but they, the numbers are just not as massive as they were in 2004 when all this first happened. I mean, I think it's going to be tough for gay activists to pass referendums that undo that, but not that tough. The way this is going, it's just not. I mean, I want to keep repeating myself, but just their arguments just don't make sense as people notice that this doesn't cause any problems. I mean, they either know gay people and they deal with it, or I'm saying the majority of people. It was a really shocking concept, and it's like the only progressive concept that people have moved closer to, with basically everything else that I can see. The center, there's a point John Chait makes, like the center is really not defined as any particular set of positions. It's defined as the position between the parties, and everything else. The center keeps moving right, but on this, it's just because it doesn't affect anyone. It doesn't stop moving left. I mean, there's no equal playing field where the successes come when you're able to find something and fund it without a ton of people noticing. That was true in the early days for pro-gay marriage activists. That was true, although the judges who originally decided this stuff were not put in there by pro-gay campaigns. They were just liberal judges. But you can't just on the uneven plane. You just can't win anymore. But now, I had been talking about how this is a group of people seen as a replacement for some lacking support in Barack Obama's coalition, and I think you and I differ on the meaningfulness of his support with Jewish voters. Mm-hmm. So, I've seen you and Greg Sargent. Yeah, go ahead.
So Gallup released a poll showing that Jews were Jewish support for Obama was around 60%, and you made the point that Obama had won about 80% of the Jewish vote, a little more than John Kerry, but generally 80% of the Jewish vote goes Democratic in presidential elections. And you made the point that it was a pretty big deal that Obama's approval was down to 60%. But here's the thing about this: I don't think this had my working theory, based on the Gallup poll, which said that there didn't seem to be a huge reaction to the Israel speech. My working theory on why Obama's support among Jewish voters has flagged a little bit has nothing to do with Israel. I think a lot of Jewish voters are really liberal, and they are the kind of people who read Glenn Greenwald, or they read, they listen to Democracy Now!, and they're disappointed or they read Paul Krugman, and they think, Obama's not being liberal enough. He's not doing the things I want him to do, and I find that disappointing. And these are people who, ultimately are going to pull the lever for whoever the Democrat is on the ticket, and it doesn't really matter that they're disappointed with Obama. But I think everybody seems to, one of the frustrating things, I think, in political discourse about the Jewish vote is there's this perception that Israel is really all that matters, despite the fact that over and over, the Republicans' unconditional, uncritical support for Israel really hasn't won them too many votes on the Jewish side, because Jews aren't going to cast a vote to ban abortion. They're just not going to do it. And I think ultimately the same thing. I mean, barring some sort of terrible scandal, I think Jewish voters are really going to pull the lever for Obama in the same kind of numbers that they pulled it for Kerry and Gore and Clinton before, come 2012. That is.
Well, I think it's going to be a majority. This is never. There's few places where the vote matters as much as the donations, and this is the thing. I think Greg Sargent's done a pretty good job of teasing out is to what degree are Jewish donors giving up on the guy. Because it's very easy to collect anecdotes. I mean, Politico had a story last week, I think, it began literally with a dinner party, and people arguing at a dinner party about their support for Barack Obama. which doesn't seem that much different than any other dinner party. I mean, I'm sure conservatives have dinner parties too, but they don't call them that. I mean, the real American conservatives, not Georgetown elites, like that. But it was the evidence from the article was that like there definitely were some Jewish donors who liked to talk to reporters and were angry with Barack Obama. But like you could find donors from lots of other industries. It almost reminded me. At the same time, I think Andrew Ross Sorkin had a story about the degree to which Wall Street complaining about Obama was hyped up just to make a point. I mean, there's brinksmanship here, right? There's the brinksmanship that you do in the run-up to an election, denying your support is something that, some groups of donors are very good at, some parts of the base are very good at, some other parts of the base, like, I think social conservatives on the right aren't as good at this as they used to be. I don't feel like, unions are just always getting promised the moon from Democrats and then being disappointed. I don't see, they've nothing else to do, but they don't have a ton of leverage, but, donors get lots of time. There are lots of wealthy Jewish donors, and they can complain loudly about this. So we know for a fact that there are many, hundreds of Jewish donors who are really right wing on Israel and give Democrats a lot of money and don't want to give now. That's totally true. That's reflected in him doing a little bit worse than other Democrats do on these numbers, and that's like reflected by him having this flank in the House, especially, not less so in the Senate. In the House of like Democrats who will run out to criticize the stated position of the White House or the lack of a position on something like the flotilla. The fact that there is a right flank suggests that there are people, there is like a community out there that want to deny this.
Yeah. Well, I think the question of the Jewish vote and Jewish donors are two separate questions, and I think that there's, I think it's really hard to know how much, like as you said, how much of this is sort of gamesmanship and how much of it is like genuine disillusionment with Obama that's going to turn out to cost actual money when it comes time to start collecting donations. It's interesting because the Jewish vote isn't really that big in the United States. I mean, we're really talking about sort of the symbolism of having the Jewish vote more than we're really talking about a vote that's going to swing a whole lot of elections. I think, other than Florida, I mean, there's not a whole lot of states where the Jewish vote, swing states where the Jewish vote is decisive. We're really sort of talking about a sort of meta conversation in which, like, for conservatives, criticizing Obama and Israel has a lot less to do with actually getting Jews to vote for them, since they're never going to do that, than it is, sort of reminding their evangelical base where they stand on the issue, or people, or not just evangelicals, but conservatives in general, where they stand on Israel. But I think
you definitely notice that when you go to Republican events, it's like the biggest applause line more often is about Israel than about the debt or about abortion, about like anything else. Mm-hmm. Like that is a people rise to their feet kind of line.
Yeah.
As hawkish as you can get. That like we will do whatever it takes. We love Israel as much as we love the United States. Things like that. And there's this long litany of reasons why that connection's there. But that's
and I'll tell you, I think Jews are a little suspicious of that. I mean, I can only speak for myself and the people I know, but like, Jews have a lot of ambivalent feelings about Israel in the sense that, like, we want it to exist, we want to defend it, we think a lot of the criticisms of it might be based in anti-Semitism or might not be good faith criticisms, but we also are a little uncomfortable with sort of, like, I think a lot, I mean, I can speak for myself, but I think speaking to a lot of people, it gets a little uncomfortable when, like, when Republicans start talking about Israel in ways that are, so uncritical and so just like so devoted. It just strikes me as weird. It's a little suspicious. It's sort of like, it feels a little. It feels like there's. It doesn't feel quite right. I can't really explain it, but there's something suspicious about it, particularly when you're talking about the same people who, like, 10 years ago were arguing that, you need to pray to Jesus Christ in school. Like, I think there's just a level of discomfort, and like, which is why, like, someone like Sarah Palin isn't going to get Jewish voters to be comfortable with her by, sticking an Israeli flag pin on her lapel. There's just, like, a cultural, like, difference there that, professing, undying support for Israel is not actually going to cover.
Yeah, this was the story of 2008. That it sounds like way too narratively simple, but seemed to have been true. Where there were a lot of Jewish voters who got just scared straight because Sarah Palin was on the ticket.
I can tell you, I talked to some Jewish Republicans who were freaked out by Sarah Palin being on the ticket. I mean, there's I don't know. There is I can't really explain it, but I recently watched a documentary on the called The Loving Story, which is about the sort of the interracial marriage case in Virginia, and one of the lawyers is one of the lawyers in that case was this Jewish guy from the ACLU, and he basically sort of admitted that he thought that Mr. Loving was kind of a redneck, and he was afraid of him because he had sort of been culturally acclimated to believe that people like Mr. Loving did not like Jews and did not like him. And I think to a certain extent, that cultural instinct remains with certain people. Yeah,
that seems like a pretty thin reed to hope for. I mean, this is already destined to be one of those campaigns like 1980 or 2004, where the entire re-election strategy is okay. There's a couple of things we did right, and there's also an insane person who is at risk of winning the presidency if you people don't vote for me.
Well, so I don't think A, that the Jewish vote is going to swing the presidency, and B, I don't think that. I mean, in the context, like I said, in the context of this, I mean, I think there are certain Republicans who give off cultural vibes that make a lot of urban secular Jews uncomfortable, and I think that there are a lot of Republicans in the race who don't give off those vibes, so I think it's sort of a peripheral issue, because ultimately Jews are pretty liberal. They're going to vote for Democrats, and I don't think the Israel issue is going to. I don't think Obama's position on Israel is going to swing it one way or the other, because it's just there's not really enough daylight between what the Obama administration has done on Israel and what Republicans talk about on Israel and what Republicans are demanding on Israel to really make a difference.
But if you are uncomfortable with Obama and Israel, I think you have a case to make here, because it does seem, and it's something I'm sympathetic to, that Obama sympathizes with oppressed people generally. I mean, he doesn't rush in guns a-blazing every time some people are oppressed. But if you listen to what he says about Libya, if you listen to what he says to Arab audiences, listen to what he says to any audiences, he is sympathetic to people who are oppressed, and he is the first president of this generation where, if you went to college in the 80s, you were concerned with South Africa and you were concerned with Palestine, and the intellectuals were telling you about this. Some of them write for Slate about what Israel's doing now. He's clearly, I think he's more he's more sympathetic to he's not like a Norman Finkelstein on Israel and Palestine, but he clearly is sympathetic to that, and there is something go Natalie that terrifies some Jews I've talked to about him on that. They just need blind unthinking support. They don't need nuance or any sympathy. Now because they just don't take this seriously, and it's more. I can get dinner party anecdotes too along those lines, but I think that's a reasonable thing to be worried about. If the president doesn't constitutionally agree with that your group of people is more oppressed than these other people that the nation says are oppressed, and they're not alone. There's lots of, I think, interest groups who want to defend Barack Obama, but are really worried that he doesn't side with them. I mean, he managed to side with oppressed people, but also appoint bankers to prominent economic positions. And I think the angriest people in the base that I know are the ones who are liberal in economics and think this stuff works, and think he just punts and blows to the opportunity after opportunity because he trusts economic centrists too much, whatever that means. Why am I using that word? He just trusts people who want to reconstruct the system we had before September 2008. It's the same kind of disappointment. It totally makes sense to me. I see why they would run to reporters after the dinner party goes bad.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, I mean, like, you're sort of, I think there was a time when, I think what's emerging is, like, there was a time when, like, the big worry was that the Arab countries were going to wipe Israel off the face of the planet, right? Like this was, they were surrounded by hostile forces, and there was, that you had to stick with them, and you had to support them unconditionally because, otherwise, they could be destroyed at any moment. But I think what's emerging is, like, a fear of like Israel's annihilation that is no less closely held by people who are hardly, what I would describe as pro-Palestinian. People like Jeffrey Goldberg who sort of recognize, like, the demographic realities of what's going on in Israel and the Palestinian territories, where it's like, if you don't have a Palestinian state, Israel is going to someday be a one state where the majority of the people there are Palestinians, and that's going to be the end of Israel. And I think that, our like national conversation on that really doesn't reflect that. I mean, I think you're right to an extent. Really. We're really just sort of administering a nationalism test, and for some people, for some, and I'm sure for some prominent Jewish political donors, Obama fails that test. But I think that perspective on what the biggest threat to Israel is at the moment, is actually undergoing a transition. And for that reason, I don't think it's as, I think then that sort of nationalism test sort of conversation on Israel is going to change ultimately.
That would be the hope. I mean, it is nuanced. I mean, you even despite our last names, I am not Jewish, and you are.
I am.
You understand this a bit more. But I mean, most of the people I talked to about this, I think if I just write them all down, are Republicans who are in that first category where we were talking about the evangelicals who want to save Israel but aren't trusted by liberal Jews. So I mean, that's where I'm getting a lot of this from. It just makes sense to me. But I like on a totally different topic that I noticed the post you wrote, I think today or yesterday, about racebending, which was I don't know. I hadn't heard that term before. Explain what we're gonna like dive into pop culture now, but explain.
Right.
Explain
So
what that term is.
I didn't come up with the racebending term. I think it's like the other term is airbending, which is a reference to M. Night Shyamalan's adaptation of a children's cartoon set in a sort of Pan-Asian world. That was when he adapted it for film, he managed to cast all the protagonists as white people.
World.
And so, just in general, there's like this so already in Hollywood, you don't have a lot of opportunities for leading men, and like there's a sort of easy economic response to this where people are like, people of color don't get cast in leading roles because they're not bankable. And this like really sort of isn't accurate. I mean, the most bankable star in Hollywood is a black guy named Will Smith, who someday I'm expecting will probably play Obama in the Obama biopic. He's got the earth for it.
There's a devastating line I think Jim Carrey had like a year ago. He said, "If there's an Obama biopic, it'll end in January 2009." The inspiring story will end in January 2009.
That's pretty brutal. But there's a lot of what's interesting, I think, and what I'm particularly interested is in geek culture. Like, geeks are like real sticklers for cinematic adaptations. They're cinematic adaptations of comic books and books and things like that being like sort of exactly accurate to the source material. And something that happens is like, when a white character is replaced by a black character, say a la Michael Clark Duncan in Daredevil, there's like an outcry about it. But when you cast a white actor to fill a role that in the comic book was traditionally filled by someone of color, like there just like isn't as much. It's just not as much of a big deal. Nobody's screaming about political correctness. So when you have like I think in the new Bane movie, the actor is white even though Bane is technically Cuban.
Is he Cuban? I thought he was from he's like a fake South American country or Central American country.
Right, he's from some like fake Caribbean country that sort of seems like it might be Cuba, but it's not an actual nation. And it's just there was all this like there's a sort of mini controversy on the internet last year when Donald Glover from Community was like, well, I want to be Spider-Man, and everybody was like, oh, I don't know about that, and Stan Lee actually weighed in and was like, oh, I think it'd be okay to have a black Spider-Man. And I'm just sort of fascinated by this, like, insistence on sort of, like, racial accuracy in imaginary worlds, right? I mean, you're talking about people climbing on walls or flying through the sky, or, you know, in the case of something like Lord of the Rings, you're talking about little hobbits and trees that talk and monsters, and everybody gets really mad if, like, you know, if someone says, well, I think we should add some, you know, people of color to the cast or something like that. I just think it's really interesting.
Yeah. Thor just, like, went there and didn't really apologize for it. In some weird ways, it was one of the Warriors 3 was Asian and had, you know, like, kind of a Asian fighting style.
Yeah.
But the part of it that confused me was that he also had, like, an accent. I don't know where you get the accent in if, like, he was from the Little Korea in Asgard or something. But, you know, that's they decided to do. And, yeah, it's like, I think you pointed out that the objection seems to be, you know, you can go ahead and adapt my thing I like in pop culture, but don't be politically correct about it, which seems kind of stupid. You know, if like, Idris Elba's better than most actors, and, you know, Will Smith is a pretty, I think, better than, like, a lot of the other action stars he's competing with. I mean, remember that whole period when they were trying to turn Colin Farrell into an action star? I thought was really misbegotten. I couldn't figure out, like, he was being in things. Like, how good is Will Smith or anyone else at, like, pulling people up the ladder? Because there's a lot of, you know...
I don't know. Like, he seems to be sui generis. I mean, like, you know, what's interesting is that I think Will Smith is an example of race bending in the opposite direction. I mean, he's, I think, the only one I can think of in terms of, like...
Wild Wild West is actually problematic because it's really weird and anachronistic to have, like, a black guy in the year 1870.
But nothing else in Wild Wild West is anachronistic.
Well, the spider, but anyway.
No, but I mean, like, you know, I Am Legend is a remake of, like, the proto-zombie film. And, of course, the character in that was not originally black. And you know, nobody really cared about that. I mean, I think if you, like, get a certain level of star power, it actually doesn't matter. I think, like, if you're someone that people love enough, they don't actually care if there's a possibility that, you know, most people might not actually care if you are cast in that role. There isn't so much of a geek backlash, but the problem is, you know, with so few opportunities already for these actors, and, like, the opportunities that exist sort of being turned over to non-traditional casting, there's not a lot of opportunity for, like, the next Will Smith to even be discovered. I mean, like, you know, Will Smith, you know, 10, 15 years ago was you know, he was... before he was a guy on a sitcom, he had, like, a really corny PG-13 rap album. I mean, who would have thought that he would be, you know, someday the biggest star on the planet? But, you know, like, if you can't find these people...
This is actually, like, the key part of the plot of Jersey Girl that you just mentioned. But anyway. Yeah, especially, I don't understand it when there's, like, the new X-Men movie is quite good, but it involves kind of a lot of, not bargain basement, but less well-known X characters, and they could have done that. I think they ended up making Riptide was vaguely from the same fake Latin American country that Bane was, but, you know, like, why they retconned Banshee from a Irish guy to an American guy, and, like, why not go another step? And instead, what they do, spoiler alert, is they have one black character who then quickly dies,
right, almost immediately.
And I just didn't think you could still do that. Just at least for dramatic purposes.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a joke. The black guy dies first. It's, like, literally a joke. Like, who was thinking about that script and like, had never heard that joke before, or that complaint in particular? I remember...
I just think people like these things if they think they're being interesting, as opposed to if they think they're being politically correct.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say, one of my favorite Boondocks comics of all time was written before the Star Wars prequels came out, when it was revealed that Samuel L. Jackson was cast as a Jedi, and he's like, and I think Huey is writing to George Lucas, and he says something like, you know, I'm really happy that you've cast Samuel L. Jackson as a Jedi. He better not be the first one to die. And it's just like, I mean, it's such an old trope. that it's sort of
Yeah.
comical that X-Men that the writers of X-Men didn't think of it. Although the bigger problem with X-Men First Class though is the glaring continuity errors.
But at the same time, we're kind of missing a forest for the trees because X-Men is also a movie about how white privilege doesn't allow you to see oppression. And there's not a ton of... that's kind of what every X-Men movie is about, but there's not a ton of other blockbusters. I would take Wolverine out of this.
I think...
But I need to...
sorry.
I really want to do, a whole blog heads about this topic and nothing else that people might watch. But I need to wrap things up, because that ceiling might get solved at any moment here. It won't.
I'll be holding my breath. It's great to talk to you, and let's do it again sometime.
All right, man. Thanks.
All right.